Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of APUSH History. I'm your host, Mr. Langella Sensei. So guys, last time we were here, we really focused on Jamestown, right? And I'm going to give you a quick little summary about Jamestown, and then we're going to transition into our new material. So let's get started. So the very first thing you need to understand, guys, is that England was really booming and they were really trying to expand their territory because there's a lot of issues going on back in England. The fact that there was a population growth caused a lot of issues, including poverty, economic depression between both the nobles and the peasants, a new lease on trying to gain religious freedom, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But the fact is, all these different things had caused the English to really try to test their luck in the New World. And one of the first things they did was try to have the Roanoke colony. Now, this kind of failed miserably. It was known as the Lost Colony because everyone had died within a 3-year span. So the English monarch was kind of a little on the fence of trying to start it again. So he allowed the joint stock company, known as the Virginia Company, to try their luck. So they end up gaining a lot of supporters. They finance a trip and they settle in Jamestown. Okay, Jamestown, obviously along the James River, named after King James himself. Okay, and the important thing to understand here is that at first it sounded like a great idea, but the problem is that the people they had gotten to try to farm this land were not really ready for it. They were considered gentlemen. These are people that were their sole goal was to try to find gold as much as possible. They didn't care about farming. They didn't care about hunting. They only were hunting for gold, and these people literally had no experience in the survival atmosphere that they needed to be in. They didn't know how to survive on their own. That's the important thing. So not only was that the case, but the fact is the land itself had a lot of issues. Right? It was very swampy terrain. It had a lot of mosquitoes which would bring different diseases. The water itself was undrinkable because it was based on a saltwater transition zone, right? That area between the ocean and the fresh river water that caused them to not even be able to drink it or use it for their crops. So this was a horrible choice for them. And within 3 months, a lot of people died. Now, the only saving grace was that Captain John Smith had came in to really put them in their place, right, and make them work. Right, anyone who does not work does not eat. And also, Pocahontas had forged an alliance between them and the Powhatan tribe, right? So the important thing is to understand is John Smith, with the help of Pocahontas, had given them some hope, but unfortunately, John Smith gets hurt in a gunpowder explosion, which sends him back to England. And during his time back home, the issues between the Jamestown colonists and the Powhatan tribe only got worse. And it was to the breaking point, right? They were basically on their own, and these people were dying left and right. And only due to the basically Pocahontas getting married to John Ralph and forging this alliance between the two groups were they saved, right? And that's the important thing. And with this marriage, with this new relationship, there also came benefits for the Jamestown colonists as well, and that included the introduction of tobacco. Okay, tobacco was the gold, right? The gold that they had wanted. Okay, and with tobacco comes a lot of positives and some negatives as well. First off, the positive is that it's such a big cash crop. It's instantly famous in England. People are buying it left and right, causing the Virginia Company to basically make a lot of money for a time. But they unfortunately, they invested in really some poor things, and really they thought that if they could just keep producing this tobacco, that they would end up becoming really the biggest hit in England, right? Unfortunately for them, it doesn't work out so well, right? One of the negatives that comes with tobacco is that it's very labor intensive, which means that it's very tiresome work. You need a lot of people to do this, and they didn't have enough people to really farm as much tobacco as they wish they could. So this was really the first time where people were starting to bring in African slaves to work these fields. So as I mentioned already, the fact is that they weren't as successful as they wished they could be because of the fact that the Virginia Company had made some really poor investments. They produced too much tobacco that didn't match the actual need of tobacco, and it kind of made them lose a lot of money. King James had enough, and they had made them a royal colony, and that's kind of where we left off. Now we're going to talk about Plymouth and the Massachusetts Bay colonies. All right. So first off, guys, when you take a look at the Jamestown compared to Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay, their reasonings for wanting to come here were completely different. For the Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay colony, they solely came here for religious motivation. Now, there were some people that did want it for economic means, but majority of the people here wanted to have religious freedom. Now, there were two groups that did come, right? The first group were the Pilgrims, that were known as the Separatists, okay? And the second group were the Puritans. And we'll get into exactly what they mean and why they're called different things in just a second. But the reality is, both of them were all part of this Protestant Catholic religion, okay? Protestant Christian religion, okay? And the Church of England at the time were Anglican. And the way the Anglican works is that a lot of the traditions of Roman Catholic religion, right? The idea of focusing on, communion and confirmation and, the power of the Pope. The only difference between the Roman Catholics and the Anglicans is that instead of it being the Pope is the head of the Catholic Church, right? That's what Roman Catholics believe. In Anglican religion, it's the King of England who is the head of the church, right? So all those other traditions of the Roman Catholic religion are all the same, except for the Pope is the head of the religion versus Anglican religion, okay, which is where the king's the head of it, right? So when you take a look at the two groups that do come to Plymouth and the Massachusetts Bay, they had some issue with this, okay? First off, the Pilgrims were considered separatists. They were considered separatists, and the reason why they're considered separatists is because they wanted to separate completely from the Anglican Church. They wanted to separate themselves from that religion because they felt as if there was no saving it, that it was too corrupt, it was too over the top, that they could not really bear themselves to be a part of it anymore. The Puritans felt as if this Anglican religion had a chance. The Puritans wanted to purify the religion. They wanted to fix it. Okay? And we'll get into them in a minute. I'm just jumping the gun here. But the reality is that both of these different religions, these really different sects or separations or divisions of the Protestant religion, were kind of causing some issues for King James. And there was actually a lot of persecution against these two separate groups. So the reality is these people wanted to leave because they were being persecuted, and they both had their separate reasonings for coming to the New World, and we'll get into them. So the very first one is the Pilgrims, right? And the Pilgrims, I already mentioned to you guys, were dissenters. They were simply separate themselves from the Anglican Church, and they wanted to create their own independent royal, they're really their own colony, okay? And they wanted to separate completely and try to basically show the world that their society is a perfect one that's separated from England, okay? And they first attempted to go to Holland, and it failed. However, they set sail for Virginia, which is funny because they tried to go to Virginia and they ended up in basically Massachusetts, okay? And it was kind of funny because they tried to go to Virginia and it didn't work out in the way they planned. And they were on the Mayflower, which we'll get into the next part that's really important about the Mayflower Compact. That's going to be talked about a little bit later. But basically, when they went to Massachusetts, they really were looking for really religious freedom, while certain parts of them were looking for economic freedom. Okay, the Mayflower Compact is really important because it's showing really the first real written law of the New World, especially when it comes to the American colonies. Okay, or really the English colonies. Okay, and we'll talk more about that later, just because we're going to have a segment that solely focuses on self-government, and this is a perfect example of self-government. So when they first get there, a lot of people died, right? Very similar to Jamestown, they had a lot of issues, and the big difference between Jamestown and these colonies is that they had a lot better atmosphere in the Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth areas, okay? What I mean by that is that the land itself was not so swampy. It was not as horrible as the Jamestown colonies. Now, they did suffer some hardship for sure, but it was different. One of the things that they did share in common, though, was that the Pilgrims had gained assistance from native tribes. And probably the most famous of these tribes was the native man known as Squanto, right? The Squantum is his actual name, but the English know him as Squanto. Now, Squanto, his backstory is kind of interesting. He was actually taken back as a slave to England before the Pilgrims had come, and he actually learned English while he was in England. And then when he returned to the New World, he went back to his tribe. He kind of built up the tribe again because a lot of them died from disease. So he kind of built up the tribe again. He already knew English, so when the time the Pilgrims came, he could actually communicate with them, which was perfect for them. He actually taught them how to plant crops, survive the wild, and actually help them develop their community. Now, this is the famous story where they have a feast to celebrate the harvest, and that's known as Thanksgiving. Okay? Then there's a big difference there between what happened in Plymouth versus Jamestown, right? Jamestown, not saying the natives didn't help them, but they ended up having a lot of interaction, altercation, and a lot of fighting, right? Versus here, they really had a pretty good relationship for a time. Now, under the leadership of really Captain Miles Standish and Governor William Bradford, this colony really grew. It still was pretty small compared to others, but it grew over time and it was pretty successful. Now, they had developed pretty good senses of trade as well, including the furs, fish, and lumber, okay? Now, let's take a look at Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, this is focusing on the Puritans, all right? This is the Puritans, and this is our friend, John Winthrop. Okay, so the Puritans, very different. Well, they're similar to the Pilgrims in some manner, as in they're both sections of the Protestant religion. However, the Puritans are different because they wanted to, remember, purify. They wanted to purify the Anglican Church. Their motivation to go to the New World was to basically be an example. They wanted to set an example for England and all those people in England that were really unsure about the Anglican Church. They wanted to make themselves be really be the example, so that all those people in England were kind of second guessing the Anglican Church and say maybe the Puritan religion is the better one to be. Because remember, they didn't want to just completely separate. They wanted to purify. They wanted to fix the problems of the Anglican Church. So, because of when King Charles takes over after King James in 1625, a lot of the Puritans were now really being persecuted at a high level. So they flee to try to basically set an example for the people back in England that were a little unsure about King Charles's treatment of the Protestants. Okay, in 1630, 1,000 Puritans, led by John Winthrop, sailed for Massachusetts, and they founded Boston and several other different towns. Now, while they were on the boat, they were having a lot of issues. They basically were demoralized because the trip to Boston was a very long one, and during this time, while everyone's kind of demoralized, John Winthrop writes his famous sermon, his famous piece known as A Model of Christian Charity. Okay, and that's what we're going to do in class. Now, this is a very complicated writing, and what we're going to do is we're going to complete the HAP analysis, right? We're going to be looking at the document itself, and then we will be completing the HAP analysis to really see about the motivations, the historical context, the audience, and the purpose, right, of this document. So let's take a look. All right, guys, so here's the document. Now, I'm not going to go over the entire document here, right, because that's going to be what your assignment is for those at home. And in class, we're going to be working on this in our groups, okay? But to really understand the context of what's going on is, like I already mentioned, guys, they're already they're on the boat, and they're on their way to Boston, okay? They're just trying to set the stage for us, right? And let's just say that the Puritans themselves were really, really demoralized, as in they were, first off, they were being persecuted. Okay, they were fleeing their home that they've lived their entire lives on, and they're going to a new place that they have no idea what's going to happen. right? They're nervous, they're scared, they're demoralized. So John Winthrop, who was a lawyer his whole life, right? He wasn't some survivalist. He wasn't. No, he was a lawyer, and he sees this everyone demoralized, and he feels like he needs to address everybody. He needs to kind of give them like some sort of a motivational speech. All right. So when he gets to, as they're trying to really get to Boston, to get to Massachusetts, he wants to inspire these people to kind of think a certain way and to feel a certain way. So one of the famous lines he says, is, "We have to be a city upon a hill." All right, I'll let you guys read through this, but that's probably the most important line. We need to be a city on a hill. Okay? And I want you guys to think about that as you read through this. Think about the context of what's going on. So at least it makes it more understandable for you. All right, guys, let's go back to the PowerPoint. So when we take a look at the sermon itself, all right, as I mentioned already, John Winthrop is trying to really rally the troops. He's trying to get them to basically be more excited, more driven to be successful. And what he says, basically, when you read the sermon, he's trying to call for the colonists to be a model for everyone to look up to. Right? That's what we must be, a city upon a hill for the world to see. Okay? And he's trying to basically really make a kind of like a pact with God to say, listen, it's their job to spread God's gift to others, right? It's their job to do that, right? And he tries to then tell them, listen, guys, the difference between our wealth and where we're from, how we got here, that's what brings us together. That's what ties us together. And then he goes into the idea that there's really two standard rules within our society, and that's justice and mercy. And he also exclaims, probably I think it's by the end, he says, do not expect us to be paid back for what we do. As in, we will be really saved by God, and God will grant us gifts by doing what we need to do, right? And basically it talks about, and basically I'm just giving you kind of little bits and pieces of all this, but he talks about how we all need to be together. We all need to work together because we're all body of Christ. As in, it's almost like the idea of like, if one part of the body is sick, right, then it's going to spread to the rest of the body and all will die. All will suffer. So he says that we must bring each other up. We must fight for each other. We must protect one another because we're all part of this same community, same body of Christ together. And then he finishes off with saying that we need to be the example that the world can look at. And if we can accomplish this great thing, then the world will know that we were successful, right? Remember, this kind of goes along with the idea about the Puritans purifying the Anglican religion, right? They want to purify it. They want to show that those people in England made the wrong mistake, that they picked the wrong religion. They should be closer to the Puritans. The Puritans believed that the Anglican religion was too close to the Roman Catholic religion, and they weren't focusing enough on the Bible itself. So when you take a look at this sermon, this written piece that he tells all these people, it's basically him trying to say, we need to prove everyone wrong. They're all thinking that we're going to fail, and we need to prove them wrong. And there's a reason why one of the cities they find is New England, because it's named New England. New. They want people to basically follow their example, to be the real England. That's what they want people to believe in. Okay? So the reason why this is important, I'm focusing so much on this part, is because this idea of being a city upon a hill, really, let's just say this, it doesn't change the Anglican religion. It doesn't change the people of England to switch over to the Puritan. However, the Puritans do have a major impact on the United States. Right? Their colony becomes a basis for a lot of other colonies of the area. Okay? The way that they form their government, the way that they act, the way they're tied to religion. These are all things that do have a major role in society, okay? And they make this great sense of American exceptionalism. And this is something that if you look at a lot of presidential speeches, you look at, a lot of political speeches, they always use the line, "We are a shining city upon a hill." They always use this same line from John Winthrop because this kind of jumpstarts a long trend of American exceptionalism that we still see today. That we are the greatest thing on the planet and we will strive to protect everyone. That starts from here, okay? Now, the Puritanist beliefs, the Calvinist beliefs are very strict, right? And they shape their everyday lives. Now, granted, for the Pilgrims, the Separatists, you take a look at them, okay? They felt as if there wasn't enough separation between church and state. They wanted to have a separation of church and state because they felt they had to separate from the religion in general, because if you talk down against the state, you're talking down against the religion, because remember, guys, the head of the Anglican religion is the king. So if you talk down on one aspect, you're talking down on both, okay? However, when you look at the Puritans, they were kind of tied to their religion and how it shapes their statehood. They really were driven by religion in order to kind of live the everyday lives. And really, their beliefs shape a lot of what American economy was back then. That the Protestant work ethic shows the idea of a free market economy, that people are working towards one goal. All right, they're working to benefit a certain group, okay? And we can now see that this idea, the Puritanist beliefs, can directly be tied to even the plantation economy that ends up sparking the slave labor movement, okay? Now, we see kind of the radical side as well when you look at the Puritans, right? As in, when the Pilgrims wanted its separation from church and state, the Puritans kind of embraced the idea, and they showed how far the religion can go into really causing mayhem within the state itself. Now, we all know the Salem witch trials, right? We all know kind of the short story of it. But it all started when a few girls were accused of witchcraft, and they basically had jump-started an entire witch hunt against a lot of people in the community, and people believed them. And all of a sudden, now we start getting an overreaction to basically one person's being a witch, there's another person being a witch. Then they had mass executions on people they thought were witches, but the reality was they found out that these people were just, angry with one another. And it was pretty messed up, and it showed how reliant religion was in certain towns. And it showed how much of a theocracy this colony had become. Now, we're not going to focus too much on the Salem witch trials, even though it's really fun, and I wish we could spend a lot of time on it. But unfortunately, the AP exam doesn't really care about the Salem witch trials. They kind of just say, this is an example of how religion had become such a major part in colonies of the time. Okay? So with that being said, I think I'll finish off with this. The Great Migration. The Great Migration is really where I'll stop for today. Okay? The Great Migration shows you that there were a lot of Protestants, really generally around 14,000 Protestants that had fled England to migrate to the New World. And this was, first off, a jumpstart from a lot of the persecution that was happening under King Charles I, but also because they found the success of both Plymouth colonies and the Massachusetts Bay colonies were really, they kind of made people in England see that there's new hope out there. Okay? And this is important. And we start to see more and more people come to these colonies and kind of go to, as you see on the map here, different parts of Massachusetts and even places in the Chesapeake colonies as well. Okay? Alright guys, with that being said, I think that's going to be it for us today. I hope you enjoyed the video. That's it. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. I'm always around. Langella Sensei out.